So now I would like to briefly introduce all our speakers before we get started with the discussion. First, we have Dr. Amy Dunstan. Dr. Dunstan is a patent agent registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office and works in the intellectual property section at Denton, an international law firm. Her work is focused on preparing and prosecuting patent applications for clients in the agricultural biotech space. Amy received her PhD in biology from Brown University. Next, we have Dr. Katie Langin, who is the associate editor for the career section of Science. Her professional roots are in academia, as she holds a PhD in ecology and spent years as a grad student and postdoc studying the ecology of birds. Her first taste of journalism was at National Geographic, where she joined the daily news team as an AAAS Mass Media Science and Engineering Fellow. She served as a news intern at Science before joining the careers news team as a staff reporter and editor in 2018. Next, we have Professor Marilyn Miller, who is an associate professor in the forensic science department at Virginia Commonwealth University. As a post-secondary educator, she teaches a wide variety of forensic science and crime scene investigation classes to both forensic science and criminal justice majors at the undergraduate and graduate levels. She has testified over 400 times in county, state, and federal courts of law as an expert witness in the field of forensic sciences and crime scene reconstruction. And finally, last but not least, we have Dr. Ofra Weinberger, who is the Director of Commercialization and Licensing at Columbia Tech Ventures and Associate VP for Intellectual Property and Tech Transfer at Columbia. Dr. Weinberger leads the licensing and startup formation team at Columbia, overseeing the commercialization of technologies. She oversees the management of over 400 inventions, 200 patents, approximately 100 licenses to industry, and the formation of around 25 new startups per year. Dr. Weinberger received a PhD in immunology from Harvard University. So thank you all for joining us, and I'm really excited to see where this discussion takes us. And now I'm going to pass it on to Boyuan, who's going to be directing the panel discussion.
Hey, thank you, Pranay. So I'll try to take it from here. Okay, again, thank you everyone for coming, and thanks to our amazing panelists for attending this event. So let me just start off with a very simple question. And this is directed to all of our panelists. So if it is possible, or if there's anything that we missed in the bio that Pranay had just presented, could you maybe add a little bit to your journey, and also to yourself, and also what your profession is in general? And we can start with Dr. Dunstan.
Sure. So I'm a patent agent, and yes, a lot of it was actually described in the bio. But the job of being a patent agent basically means that I work with a law firm, and the companies hire our law firm to help their researchers get patents on the work that they've done at the company. And we also do a lot of work with universities. So Dr. Weinberger also probably works with patent agents and patent lawyers in her work. So in order to get a patent on an invention, you need to draft a detailed application that shows someone how to make or use the invention. And it also needs to kind of show why the invention is a step above what has been come previously in the field. So a lot of my work is drafting applications, which means working with inventors and doing that kind of work, which involves a lot of PhD skills. And then I also argue with the patent office about what's new and inventive about what we're trying to patent. And that also involves knowing kind of what came before. So you have to be able to kind of get your arms around where the field stood before this invention and why this represented a step forward. So that's kind of the other half of my job, which also I think uses some PhD type skills. And then in the intervening time since I've gotten my PhD, I've also learned kind of a lot about patent law, which is really just a small sliver of law generally. But that's kind of what I've added on since then.
Thank you, Dr. Dunstan. And yeah, since this is really an event for you all to talk about your journey, so feel free to take up and yeah, if you feel comfortable with it.
I go next?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So, so I represent the science communication career pathway on this panel, which entails a lot of different types of communication. My specific form is in journalism. And so I work for the news team at Science Magazine in the career section. And my title is associate editor, but it's a little bit misleading because I spend a lot of my time writing my own stories. And so I interview usually scientists about problems they're encountering in academia, about their career paths. I spend a lot of time talking to people about their career paths. So this panel is up my alley. And I write stories about all sorts of topics. So career planning, diversity and inclusion initiatives, mental health, mentorship issues, policy decisions that affect scientists. Basically anything that is kind of a behind the scenes look at how to get a career in science. So not necessarily focusing on the science that people are doing, but the challenges that they face on their path to becoming a scientist. So I write a lot about those stories myself. I also do editing, as my title suggests. So I edit a column that is written by professors. I also edit essays that are written by scientists. So on the back page of Science Magazine, so this is a hard copy, on the back page, every week there's a essay that's written by a scientist. And this is one that I edited a few weeks ago, and it might be of interest to you all. It's written, the topic is focused on how to mentor undergrads in a way that is more effective. It was written by a grad student kind of lamenting that he had received poor mentorship when he was an undergrad. So, so I spent a lot of time working with scientists on how to craft their messages and how to shape their stories. And so I spent a lot of time learning about new things, talking to people, and a lot of time writing, which is something that I really enjoy doing. I did come from academia, and I was on an academic path for a while. I assume we'll get to questions later about kind of how we all got to our careers. So I think I'll leave that part of my story for later.
Thank you, Dr. Langin. That definitely sounds like a very, very important job to have to serve the science community in large.
I think I was next in our intros. It's interesting. I've heard a couple of different terms: our experiences through time and science communication. And since I'm probably one of the older members of this panel, I've got lots of experiences through time. Because way a million years ago, when I was an undergrad, I certainly never ever saw myself as a forensic scientist. Most importantly, I didn't even know what that was way back when. I guess we could thank O.J. Simpson for letting the world know what forensic science is. But most undergrads, I'm discovering, weren't even born when that happened. So being an undergraduate, I was a chemistry major. I was a chemistry geek, had a key to the science building, and that I was going to go to medical school. Fortunately, I discovered early enough that I didn't like sick people, so we knew that wasn't going to happen. So I happened to find an article in, it wasn't Science Magazine, sorry, but it was in the student affiliate book for the American Chemical Society. It talked about these folks that did these wonderful things with evidence and crime scenes and finding out who the bad guys are. And I thought, oh, that sounded kind of interesting. So I went to graduate school, got a master's degree in forensic chemistry, and worked a long time in the field doing the other part of the comment that I heard, which was science communication. Forensic science is one of the few areas that actually communicates our science to a unique group of people called juries and law enforcement officers and judges. And then, as I like to call them, the dark side, the lawyers of the world. So it's a whole different world of science communication with a very practical application. And so if anybody wonders how does someone who goes from chemistry to forensic science and then higher ed, well, I discovered that when I started teaching 25 years ago, I didn't know anything about teaching. So that's when I got a doctorate in education. And so I'm lucky. I have a science background and an education background, which was nowhere, anywhere where I thought it would be at this point in my life. So when we get to how I got to various places, I'll add to that story.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Miller, for that amazing introduction. Dr. Weinberger, do you have anything to say about yourself and also your job?
Hi, so I guess I'll just introduce myself. I think it's really, really interesting and pertinent to the forum of this particular event. The comment that I made as we were waiting to start, and that was that I wish that there had been sessions and panels about alternative careers for scientists when I was going through my process. But we'll talk about that, I guess, in a few minutes. I'm involved in technology transfer. For those of you who don't know what technology transfer is, it's essentially universities or academic business development. So my work is a combination of science, business, and law. You can come into this career path from either one of those backgrounds. I happen to come into it, evolve into it from a scientific background. And there's a lot to say about tech transfer. So I'll give you the 60-second version of what it is by describing our mission. And our mission is to facilitate the transfer of scientific discoveries out of the academic laboratories and into the hands of commercial partners, such that products can be developed out of the scientific discoveries that are made in the academic laboratories for the benefit of society. That's our mission. That is what we're working towards every day. We manage the university's intellectual property, which means the university's patent portfolio, and we educate the community and provide support for entrepreneurial and commercialization related activities. And there's a lot of information on our website for those of you who are interested in learning more about it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Weinberger. Yeah, and also thank you again to our panelists to provide their amazing introductions to their jobs and what it really entails. And so, yeah, picking up on a recurring theme that some of our panelists have been mentioning, one of them is that you guys seems to have this seem to come to your fields of study or your fields of work through the fields of sciences. And one part that kept sort of coming up was how you first got introduced into your current working field. So our next question will be directed again to our panelists, as in how exactly did you came across the field that you're interested in right now, and how did it appeal to you in the first place?
Can tackle that first if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you want to, or do you want us to go in the same order again?
Well, I don't think I don't think it's very important, but I mean, yeah, I think it's okay that you can go ahead, Dr. Langin.
It doesn't matter to me. Amy, you can go for it if you're ready.
Well, mine is actually very short, so I'll let you go for it in a second. I actually did have a panel, I guess it was kind of a mini course that Career Services did for us at Brown, and it was like this, and it was actually really helpful because you kind of could see just a little snapshot of each thing. And I was working away at my PhD and realized I had kind of wanted to do something that probably was outside of academia, and was able to find the patent agent job that way. So mine is quick.
Yeah, mine might be a little bit longer. I'll try to keep it short. So I'm now a science journalist. I spent a lot of time as a scientist, but before that in high school, I actually wanted to be a journalist and I loved writing. And so my turn after academia kind of didn't really come completely out of left field. But when I was an undergrad student, I was pretty focused on becoming a scientist. And at that point, I'd just really fallen in love with science and I'd kind of forgotten about my journalism ambition. And I loved all sorts of fields of science. I loved chemistry and physics and geology and geography and biology. And I had a really hard time figuring out what to major in. And I ended up deciding to major in biology and ended up focusing on ecology and evolution. But, you know, at each step of my journey, I had a really hard time specializing. You know, the further you go, the more you have to specialize. So I did a master's degree. I was specialized. I did a Ph.D. I was specialized. I did a postdoc. I was even more specialized. And through that time, I really imagined becoming a professor. And I had that goal in my head for a long time. But the further along I got, I changed my mind for a couple of different reasons. One was that I met a guy during my PhD and he didn't want to leave Colorado. And so I was trying to figure out career paths that would allow me to stay in Colorado, which isn't so easy if you want a faculty job. Another reason is I looked around in academia and I saw a lot of really stressed out people without great work-life balance and a lot of toxicity. And I didn't like that. It didn't feel good to me. It wasn't good for my mental health. And so that part wasn't great. The third reason, actually, I think I haven't entirely understood until I've been able to look back on it, but I got tired of being a scientist over time. And I think I got bored because I had funneled myself into this very narrow area of science. And it took me away from what got me interested in science to begin with, which was learning about new things. And in hindsight, I've realized that what I really like about journalism, in addition to being able to spend a lot of time writing, which I really enjoy, is the ability to kind of get back to the place of being able to learn about a lot of different things. And it has taken me back to what got me interested in science to begin with. But I got into journalism specifically through the mass media fellowship that was mentioned in my bio. I did that between my PhD and my postdoc and just absolutely loved it. I had already committed to a postdoc and wasn't quite sure I wanted to leave academia. So I stuck that out, but it was just totally miserable. And it was clear to me that I was on a tangent in my career path and I needed to kind of right the ship and find a new direction. And so I dove into science communication, and now I have a job I love. So it all worked out, but it was definitely a circuitous journey, and I didn't follow the straightest path to where I am today.
Oh, I would love to follow on that, Katie, because you reminded me of several aspects of my journey. So what you said that particularly resonated was the fact that the tools that we use in scientific research nowadays are so powerful that the questions that we ask and can ask are increasingly specific and narrow. And that's all great, but what I love about my job is the ability to be looking at a really eclectic collection of information, of discoveries, and that no 2 days are the same. And it's much more of a big picture kind of career path, in the sense that there are all kinds of different projects and opportunities and developments and discoveries that we're dealing with on a daily basis, as opposed to the very specific questions that one asks in laboratory research. It's not, right or wrong. It's kind of like what makes your day hum along, and what really appeals to you. So I feel blessed that I've had two very gratifying and interesting careers so far in my life. One was academic research and basic science, and the other is what I've been involved with over the last 20 years or so, and that's technology transfer. I did my graduate work and my postdoc in very high-powered laboratories at Harvard and at Dana-Farber in the lab of a Nobel laureate. And at a time that academic research was truly, academic research. Working in industry was not the kind of two-way street and that universities and industry and in the life sciences pharmaceutical industry enjoy currently. It was more of a one-way street. There was a definite hierarchy, and you stayed at the university and you had an academic career path, or you went over to industry and you stayed there. So it was never anything that I really considered or was very cognizant of or kind of resonated with me. I became a faculty member at Columbia. I ran a lab for half a dozen years or so. And only then did I look around and see, Katie, what you just described, that there were senior investigators, senior PIs who were extremely accomplished, who are still sweating over their next grant proposal. And at that point, I started to wonder if perhaps there was an alternative career path that I had not explored, not been aware of, that was worth my while to look into. Or, was this the path that I was kind of committed to for the next 30, 40, 50 years? I discovered technology transfer serendipitously. I was not aware of what it was. It was at a different time for this career. It was not as established and professional and sophisticated an operation as it is currently. It's really, come up and matured as a career and as a professional community. And to make a long story short, it was suggested to me to be a faculty liaison to the office. I loved it. I made a gut-wrenching decision to shut down my lab and take a position as a licensing officer in the Columbia Tech Transfer Office. And the rest is history. I've been the director of licensing now for close to 20 years. So that's my journey. It was somewhat serendipitous. It was right for me in hindsight. And unfortunately, when giving advice to people just starting out, such as yourselves, it's hard to recreate anybody else's journey precisely. You can learn from other people's experiences and kind of be made aware of opportunities out there, but don't think that you can follow precisely in somebody's footsteps.
I guess I'm last. I kind of already alluded to the fact that as an undergraduate, I was a chemistry geek, but I didn't want to go into research. Sorry, all the research scientists out there. I wanted to do a very practical application, and I guess forensic science is about as applicable to anything as you can imagine. I too, Dr. Langin, love the sciences. And I think that's what also drives me towards forensic science for all these years, is that I get to be a biologist, a physicist, a chemist, a engineer. Sometimes I even get to be an artist with photography and crime scene sketches. And so I really, really loved forensic science. But after 15 years of getting up in the middle of the night to go to not such a great neighborhood, and then doing my best job that I could do at a crime scene and analyzing the evidence in the laboratory, I go to court, and somebody who was not science trained, somebody who wanted to find some little mistake, I got tired of always going to court and have to justify the science that I was using. And I said, well, let's start at the beginning. Let's train forensic scientists to be better scientists. And yes, that's very topical these days about the pseudoscience of forensic science. And that is categorically what I have spent my career opposing, is forensic science is science-based. It has that word forensic in front of it because it has to do with law. But so after 15 years, I found an academic job, which is exactly the opposite of what everybody else here has done. You were all academics and then got other applying jobs. Something about those that can do and those that can't teach. Sorry, it doesn't work for me. You've got to do it first in order to teach it better. And so this is my 26th year of teaching forensic science. The last 15 or so, I've been kind of pigeonholed towards crime scene investigation because I want to get science at the crime scene. Law enforcement officers historically are the people that investigate crime scenes, collect the evidence, and send it off to some state lab or a local lab. I think the scientist belongs at the scene. It's the scientist that knows how to find all the evidence. It's the scientist that knows why tests work and why tests don't work at the crime scene, as opposed to someone who reads a checklist. So my research area in forensic science is getting science easier transposed to the crime scene, but maintaining the science. So I'm still a practical scientist, but I still love forensic science.
Okay, thank you all for sharing such a relatable journey. And I'm sure like plenty of us will one point or another reach maybe like the point that you guys had reached a part of your lives. And yeah, so, and it seems that a lot of you guys have talked about how like there's some major challenges, like, you know, work such as in the fields such as scientific research that might not be what you have desired. And so my next question is related to that. And it's also again directed to all of you. And so it is like as you were committing to your current career, what have been the biggest challenges that you have faced?
I can start on this one. I think that the biggest challenge really was wrestling with sort of the misconception that I needed to stay in academia and follow a very traditional career path. And even I think I relate to what everyone else has said, where I really wanted to follow science at a little bit of a higher level, where I had access to more information, and maybe I was synthesizing more information at more of the review article level, rather than focusing in on one question for years. And so I think then once I had realized that I was kind of having that feeling and that I felt like I was trapped in sort of the path that everyone had laid out or following in people's footsteps, was how to get out of that. And I think that that's kind of the big question. And I think the answer that I found was just to talk to a lot of different people, and even just email people who were grads of my program who had left, or even just people who worked in patent law in the city where I lived. And, you know, not everyone always responds to you, but I think that just put yourself out there and kind of reach out to people who have a job that you think you might be interested in, and then just see if you can get them to talk to you about what they do every day. And in my job now, I do hear from, you know, maybe 1 or 2 people a year that gets in touch. And sometimes they really find out that they are interested in something like patent law. And a lot of times when we're hiring years later, you know, I'll look people up and see if they've pursued it or if they'd like to give it a try now. So I think that once you've realized that maybe you want to take a little bit of a different path, you can also take the step of reaching out to people that, especially alumni, connections, friends of friends, and just see if you can get someone to talk to you over coffee about their job. And you can find out a lot that way.
So I guess I'll follow on that, Amy. So I have forgotten that part of my journey, and that was my experience as well, being a faculty member and then moving out of that position into something that was more clearly identified and identifiable as university administration. Actually involved, I'd say, about a year of like getting comfortable with the new community that I was a member of. The other thing that was challenged, so I guess my challenges were more in the transition than in anything else. And there's a very, very different culture and language associated with being an academic scientist as opposed to what I am in tech transfer, which is really a business officer. The discussions and the vocabulary and the language and the parameters around what you do relate more to patent strategy, commercialization plans, working and talking with investors and companies, as well as the scientists. So you have to have many different sets of vocabulary and sets of understanding and sensitivity and an appreciation for a lot of different cultures, the academic culture, the scientific culture, the legal culture, and that's IP attorneys as well as contract attorneys, as well as the business and investment community. So it took me a while to transition out of critiquing the science, which is something that we do on a pretty regular basis when we're scientists, to strategizing around how to advance a scientific discovery down the path and partner with an appropriate commercial or investment partner, which is a very, very different set of discussions and conversations. So I think switching hats was probably quite a challenge for me for a while.
Yeah, a lot of those really resonated with me. One thing, if you all do go to grad school, it depends what department you land in and what field you're in, but there is a lot of stigma associated with following a non-academic career path in some departments. And so you get kind of in this culture where people assume that most students want to be faculty members. And sometimes it's hard to kind of pull yourself away from that. And I think Amy said something like, follow your own path, not the path laid out for you by other people. And that's something I really struggled with. I had in my head that I wanted to be a faculty member, and all of my academic mentors wanted me to follow that path. And I had a hard time kind of just getting out of that mindset myself for a few reasons. One was I'd invested a lot of time and hard work in that path, and I had a strong CV that was competitive to follow a path and being a scientist. And it was hard to give that up. I also am the kind of person, I don't like disappointing mentors. I don't like disappointing other people. And so the idea that by, kind of following a different path, the idea that that was going to disappoint people and people were going to maybe think I was a failure, I had a hard time with that mentally. And, I think it's just really great advice. You need to follow your own compass, your own path. Don't follow what was laid out for you by other people, follow what feels true to you. And it took me years, honestly, to kind of get to that realization. And I was on the fence for a long time about what direction I wanted to go in. But now I'm just really glad that I switched directions because I'm a lot happier.
My biggest challenges, and I'll make it plural, the first one centers around both my students and the public in general, is I have to always get past, you cannot believe forensic science on television. We are not CSI. We don't solve cases in 50 minutes, less the commercials. So that's a big challenge. But it's kind of a challenge that I use to my benefit as well. When I go to court to testify early on in my career, I could put a jury to sleep like that. But fortunately, because of things like CSI, I can actually see jurors move forward in their seats to listen to what I'm going to tell them about forensic science, how we solve the case. They get so excited. And I keep thinking of the days of when I used to put people to sleep. But for the audience that's part of this webinar, talking about, well, how do you do this? I think for all of the things that all of us have talked about, is you just have to have the courage to do it. Sometimes you succeed right away, and sometimes you have to work through it. And sometimes, as I like to say to students, you have to have plan B. Sometimes the plan that you really thought you wanted to do just isn't going to work. So you always have to have that little plan B that you're holding on to. I was going to work for a law enforcement agency, a state or federal agency, in a forensic lab for the rest of my life. I didn't want to do that. I discovered that I like to teach people about forensic science. And so I was lucky enough to get out of the lab and actually go into a teaching position. Yes, we do still fret over getting our grant money. We do still fret about getting publications. We still fret about getting our books published. But there's nothing quite like seeing a student who has the light go off in their eyes. I get it. I want to do this. And then they have to just say to them, to do it, you just do it. To borrow Nike, sorry. You just have to make your mind up that you're going to do it. And for me, the challenge has actually been pretty easy. I turned the challenge around and used it to my benefit.
Yeah. Yeah, it must have been very, very fulfilling to work through those early stage challenges and find that like this job is like right for you in many ways. Yeah, so I guess the next question would be, so how have you find yourselves like in the process of doing like choosing the career path that you are right now? How have you, in what ways have you noticed your mindset or yourself have changed since you've taken up this career path? And how would you see yourself in the future, say like 5 to 10 years?
Can I handle that one first?
Yeah.
I just hope I'm still alive in 10 years. No, but you know what? My mindset for this as I'm getting towards the end of my career is to keep it exciting. And the best part, that's one of the best parts about academia, is every year we get a new bunch of new students who are really excited about getting in the business. Do they maybe change their minds? That's fine. We all changed our minds. So for me, I had to go from doing the same thing all the time to now new challenges every year with new students. I love it, but I also would be lying to say that I'm actually looking forward to retiring here pretty soon, because I'm going to work on my golf game and my pickleball game.
I think you probably selected people who are very happy with the careers that they're involved with right now. My particular kind of career is different every day. So just the nature of what I do, I deal with the scientific discoveries. So no 2 days are the same. Different PIs, different investigators come in with different scientific insights and discoveries that present new opportunities and require different strategies to move them forward. The investment in the business kind of world changes all the time. So where a few years ago, most of our technologies were partnered with existing companies, now most of our most exciting opportunities are being spun out into new companies to startups. So that requires different kind of strategy and a different kind of thinking and a different kind of audience. So the days are by definition so varied and different, but I think it would be a mistake for us to be describing our work with rose-colored glasses. Every job has what I call its stuff. So there's the part of the job that is exciting, gratifying, the stuff that keeps you coming to work every day, even if you're sitting in your bedroom these days. But and then there's the stuff, they're the cakes that you bake and the dishes that you have to clean. And so every job has the more exciting and the less exciting parts to it. But you have to keep your eye on the big goal, on the big vision, on where you're going and what the objectives are. And I just find this career path extremely gratifying and exciting.
One thing that I think this is a good follow-up on that. One thing that I've done is to kind of reframe my career so that I'm not so focused on one destination point. I feel like that led me astray for a long time. And I read this great book called Designing Your Life, which is wonderful and everyone should read it. And in it, they say something to the effect that you don't have to know where you're going. You just have to know that you're headed in the right direction. And when you reframe your career path in that way, I think it frees you to not be so worried about, this is going to be my terminal career. you know, for instance, I'm in journalism right now. I really love my job. I'm totally happy where I am today. Am I always going to be in journalism? You know, I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that I feel confident, at least, that what I'm doing right now is putting me on a path that is going to lead me to whatever the next thing is in my career. And so I'm not worried about it because I feel good about where I'm headed. And for me, that reframe has just been really helpful and has relieved a lot of anxiety.
I agree with all of that. And I think a lot of us have sort of alluded to the process of finding your way in shorter steps. And that's kind of the opposite of maybe what it's easy to think could happen when you're an undergrad or even a grad student, because everyone's like, and then you'll be a professor. And it sort of seems like one step, but I think almost all people I know of that have had a nice, enjoyable career have taken a lot of little steps. And I think each step also involves that aspect of going into a different culture or doing something that you don't know how to do very well, or uncertainty. And you sort of take a step, you know, acclimate to that, and you develop some expertise in that area. And then when you've sort of mastered that, you can kind of move on to your next step. So I think if you feel like you look back and you've taken a couple steps that didn't seem so connected to you, you might still be heading in the right direction, and I wouldn't be discouraged by that. The only thing I would say is that you do need to probably really commit yourself to working hard at each thing that you take on, because that really helps you to find out if that's right for you or not. So I would discourage you from ever saying, oh, this isn't for me, I'm going to kind of just not participate. I think you need to give everything your full effort, but you may find that after a year or two, you know, you need to slightly readjust your direction.
Yeah, it sounds like a very, very exciting process for you all to explore your passions and really to explore yourselves in the process.
Also somewhat intimidating. It's not all excitement. It can be.
See, I felt very uncomfortable when I first left academia because of the culture shift. And I felt, you know, I have all these credentials and I don't really know kind of what's going on day to day. So I think feeling uncomfortable isn't necessarily a bad sign.
And you know, it's interesting, Amy, for you to say that, because when I left my very practical job and went into academia, I had to prove myself as a scientist again. I had to show these folks that I wasn't just this person who did crime scene investigation work, but I was actually a scientist. So it's, you know, I think it's a matter of experiencing pressure wherever you go. But you know, as I tell my students all the time, you have to do your best work. If you don't do your best work, or you're only doing it a little bit or on the good days, you might as well give it up. There was a question, I went ahead and read one of the questions that asks about pressure to produce results. Sometimes your results have to be baby steps. Sometimes they're small things. You know, you're not going to get a Nobel Prize your first year out of school or your first year in a research laboratory. You know, sometimes just making a widget is enough to be important. At VCU, we had a Nobel Prize laureate in chemistry, and he just made a little gizmo that fit into an instrument and won a Nobel Prize in chemistry. John Fenton was an absolutely astounding scientist and got the prize for doing something that revolutionized an instrument, but it was a widget.
Yeah, thank you all for that. Yeah, I mean, definitely exploring can also be very, very intimidating as well. So I was going to ask what are your advice to the students, like especially in science, that are conflicted about what they're going to do. But I think that in your each of your ways, I think you're able to explain that very, very well. So I'm just gonna skip ahead, and since we are close to the end of our design time, I'm going to hand it to my colleague Joshua, who would ask some of the questions raised by our audience, and hope you're able to answer some of them.
Awesome. Thank you, Boyuan. So I'm going to go ahead and ask some of the questions that have been coming in through the Q&A and also in the chat, and I've also been receiving some privately as well. So the first is on mentorship. We've talked a lot about the difficulty of talking with colleagues and peers about making these changes. So were there any mentors in your academic circles or fields that inspired you or helped you make these difficult decisions? And if so, what do you think is some advice that they have given you that you think like maybe reduce some of the anxiety regarding these changes? And we could begin with anyone who would like to start.
Well, I talked to a lot of people just to educate myself as to what tech transfer was all about before I took a transition into it. Nothing really prepared me for the experience that we described here during the panel of adjusting mentally to having switched out of an academic track position when we were in, and and on an academic track, but it at least made me appreciate what the purpose and the objectives and the goal and what value this whole like career and industry represented into the academic community. So that was one step. Another thing, just because we're so close to the end of the time for the panel, I just wanted to share with the audience that in thinking about what skills one might want to prepare themselves with for any of the careers I think that we were discussing here, I would come down to communication skills. So, I mean, I represent the convergence of science, business, and law, and everybody here is kind of describing some kind of application of a science background. Communication skills are key to being successful.
I agree with that. For the mentor question, I'll add that I didn't have a lot of people within academia I could talk to about wanting to leave academia. But one thing that was really important for me was getting experiences in newsrooms. So, doing a fellowship that placed me at National Geographic, working with science journalists, and I got mentors that way. And I met people who had the same mindset as me and had experience in that profession. And so for me, that was really key, getting that outside perspective, because I feel like I was just in this culture where everyone just was squarely focused on becoming a professor. And so it was important for me to get out of that. One thing I'll also say is, if you are interested in going to grad school, but maybe following a non-academic path, it's good to find someone who's going to be supportive of that and is open to it, because I think that can make the process a lot easier.
I also didn't have a lot of mentors within academia. I think that there was just a sort of a difference in perception of what would be a good, successful career. But I found mentors incredibly helpful once I left, just because they can give you kind of the lay of the land. particularly law firms have a very unique culture that's different as well. And I think that I had several people who kind of took me under their wing and maybe kept me from making some missteps that I would have otherwise made as I kind of shifted over to being in a different work environment. And that also goes back to communication. Several of these people actually in law have advised me that really the fundamental skill of law is writing. So that form of communication. I think it's true that all of these careers do involve a lot of communication and maybe translating science to people who are less used to that academic form of science. But in a law firm, it definitely is writing skills. So if you have a chance to develop those, take classes or do any kind of internship that involves writing, that would help you in a more legal direction.
In forensic science, my first career working in a forensic lab, there are not a lot of mentors. So what I kind of did was hook my self to one of the older members of the lab and would just talk to them. when I switched to academia, this seems so weird because it's so backwards from everybody else here. I just happened to find a peer who was my age. You know, they might have been someone who has been in academia for a while, but, you know, I was almost 50. So I hooked into a person that I could relate to here at DCU. And I found that extremely valuable. But I did also want to mention to undergrad students who are searching for mentors and searching for someone that can help them find maybe that non-traditional science job is go volunteer. Whether it be for, in my case, a forensic unit at a local law enforcement agency, or even a state lab if you happen to live near one. They are always looking for volunteers. Yeah, you might have to file papers, but you know what? You're there, you ask, you observe, you ask questions, you talk to people. People love to talk about themselves. So how are you going to learn about the profession? You simply talk to people. It's not a paying job, but it's a start. So that's kind of the mentorship I would recommend to undergrad students. If you go on to grad school, insist upon not just doing a thesis, but also doing an internship as well. You need both things, how to do research, and you also need to know how to apply it.
Thank you for those amazing answers. On a similar note to what Dr. Miller was asking, if one of our attendees is inspired about the particular field that you've been representing here today, do you have any next steps from them? It may be a resource or a book or a program or something that you think could be some good next steps in pursuing their field of interest.
Should we do rapid fire? One thing.
Yes.
I would say if you're interested in journalism, try to write for your school newspaper.
If you want to be a forensic scientist and you're trying to figure out how you can go find these volunteer places, just Google forensic science professional organizations. You'll find places there.
And for patent law, reach out to people, alumni, friends of friends, people you know, and talk to them about your job, because they'll probably be looking to hire someone and they might know that you're looking as well.
And I would say look for an opportunity to volunteer in a tech transfer office. It could be your university, it could be another university. For example, we now have launched an undergrad intern program and to give students exposure to tech transfer and entrepreneurship. Take advantage of a lot of the entrepreneurship related activities, programming, classes, events at your university. All universities are very keen on stimulating this kind of interest and activity on their campuses.
Awesome, thank you. With just the last couple minutes that we have left, I wanted to open the floor to see if there's anything that any of our panelists didn't get to touch on during the question and the discussion, or any words of wisdom or of optimism and hope as well for the undergraduates and graduate students that are in attendance. And not everyone needs to speak on this, but just if you have any final thoughts.
I'd love to leave you with just a kind of reflection on the nature of my work. It's very chaotic. So if you want to know like what type of person would be particularly excellent at this kind of job, it's somebody who thrives in a very chaotic environment.
Yeah, so I'll add to that, you know, I think undergrads often focus, at least I did, a lot on what I was most interested in and passionate about, but you can't lose sight of what you want to be doing on a day-to-day basis. What do you enjoy doing? You know, if you're an introvert, you probably don't want a job that involves meeting with people all day long. I'm in that category, actually. So think about, you know, what you enjoy and how, because the day-to-day of your job is really important for how enjoyable it is to you. And so don't lose sight of that.
I guess my thoughts are, as you go along, don't feel that what you did before kind of defines what you're going to do next. So I think we've all said this in different ways, but if you kind of feel like, oh, I already got this PhD and that was hard, so now I need to do X. Just remember that you can keep changing throughout your career, and that it doesn't mean you made a misstep. You're just going along your path.
And kind of to segue with what Amy just said, don't get stuck. You're never going to get stuck in the same job. Use your brain, you can get out of it. Don't ever feel like you're stuck in a job.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for all of their insight. This has truly been inspirational and extremely helpful for everyone in attendance. We are at right about out of time, so I wanted to extend a thank you to all of our panelists for taking an hour out of their Wednesday evening, out of all days of the week, to come and speak with us and share their story. It was truly insightful. Before everyone leaves, just want to quickly remind everyone that the Columbia Science Review is hosting Science Week this week, which is a celebration of science, especially in a very difficult last year. Please check out the other events that are being hosted by CSR over the next 2 days on our Facebook. Awesome. Thank you everyone for attending, and have a great evening.